Tuesday in Austin on Manor Road was the, or actually, I don't know if they have it there. I think they have it somewhere else. They don't have the UIL headquarters. There was the annual big June meeting of the UIL Legislative Council. I believe they meet twice a year, and they are they're the governing body of the UIL that kind of decides rule changes, policies, etc. And it's a big all-day meeting, and this is there's usually some big changes that come down every Legislative Council meeting. There's also things that they consider that don't make the headlines. Like, for example, they considered adding girls flag football as a UIL sport. Didn't pass. Other things like that. But they vote on a variety of different things. They take submissions from the public, etc. All that's to say that there were two big headlines coming out of the UIL Legislative Council meeting on Tuesday. One of them is that friend of the program, Dr. Charles Breithaupt, the executive director of the UIL, announced that 2024 and 2025 will be his last year. This is a guy who's been with the UIL for I think I'm comfortable saying 3 decades. Mm-hmm. I think he's been there for 3 decades. A state champion basketball coach at Hardin-Jefferson. He is from Buna originally, but he has been the executive director since 2009, just the 7th executive director in UIL history. He announced that his tenure will end at the conclusion, basically 1 year from now, at the conclusion of the 2024-2025 season. We are efforting, I'll just tell you this, just to put some pressure on my friend Logan Lawrence of the UIL, we are efforting to get Dr. Breithaupt on the show next week. So we'll see if Logan Lawrence can help us come through with that. Hi, Logan. Anyway, the other thing that came down was about division splits in a variety of other sports: baseball, softball, basketball, volleyball, and what am I thinking? Soccer. And essentially what they did is they passed the rule that they are going to treat those sports like we treat 6A football. So think about it like this. Think in 6A football. District 1 6A sends 4 teams to the district or to the playoffs, right? The 2 largest schools by enrollment of those 4 teams go to the Division 1 bracket, and the 2 smaller teams of those 4 teams go to the Division 2 bracket, and those 2 brackets don't interact. That's something we've become very accustomed to in 6A football. It is now going to be added into basketball, softball, baseball. So there will now be a 5A Division 1 girls soccer champion and a 5A Division 2 girls soccer champion. So they basically doubled the number of state championships. It's a pretty it's a pretty seismic move there for the non-football. I think we already have it in football. It's something that you've heard us talk about a lot on this show. But it's a big thing for the other sports in the UIL. And it sparked a conversation, and I was trying to follow the conversation as best as I could. And one of the things that kept coming up throughout the course of the conversation is, well, this is silly. They shouldn't have done this. They should have just added a 7A. That's what they need to do. They need to add a Class 7A in order to make things as fair and equitable as possible. Right now, we're just adding championships. Should have just added a Class 7A. And this is a popular topic that crops up every once in a while, especially in the off season. People love the idea of Class 7A. I think it's because it sounds big and cool. Mm-hmm. I remember when Class 6A became a thing. That was not the expansion of the UIL, mind you. Right. All they did was they reclassified things where they started, instead of calling it the 6-man division, they called that 1A and bumped everyone else up 1. That's all that happened. But I think people like the idea of adding a 7A simply because of the vibe that it gets of we need a super league for Texas high school football. And it keeps coming up over and over. It's a big topic of conversation. And I think it's become this catch-all solution for all the things that people think are wrong with high school athletics and specifically Texas high school football. I think that they think that adding a Class 7A is going to be like this salve that will make everything in Texas high school football better. And so I want to explore that. And I want to do a real honest look at what a 7A would look like and why it is not as simple as people get and why it wouldn't necessarily, in my opinion, solve the problem that people are looking to get at. So what I want to start with is we'll start with a baseline here. Let's put up the first graphic. This is what the UIL alignments look like right now. And by the way, we are not going to touch it. We're only going to talk about 11-man football in this one. And that is not because I don't love six-man football. Y'all know I love six-man football. But six-man football, their alignments have not changed in the last, I think, 5 or 6 alignments. It's at 104.5. If you're 104.5 students or lower, you play in 1A. So, and also any sort of changes at the top would have very, very, very minimal effects at Class 1A. So I want to be clear that we're only talking about 11-man football here. So these are the enrollment ranges. You could see that they have a wide swath. 2275 and above is 6A. You've got a big swath of nearly 1,000 student range in 5A. Another big swath of nearly 800 in 4A, 3A, 2A, et cetera. And you can also see the number of schools there, in the sense that the UIL, obviously one of their missions is to make sure that these classifications are about as even as possible. Now, as we move forward, I want to be very clear about something. There are some teams that will opt up that want to play in larger classifications for various reasons. DeSoto did that this past year. They are in 6A when they have a 5A number. We are not going to be talking about that because that's impossible to predict from a school-to-school basis. We're going to do big picture perspective. So one of the things that the UIL kind of prides itself on is they want classifications to be roughly even as far as number of schools are concerned. Obviously, 5A is bigger than 4A, as you can see, but they want them to be as even as possible, while also fitting into basically as geographically sound and balanced as it can be as well. So there are 2 ideas for 7A. One of them is for essentially what would be a super league, which would be a 1-division super league, which we would treat it as if it was 1 extra division, okay? Think of it as like 6A Division 1, then you would have 6A Division 2 and 6A Division 3, right? And so let's assume that it would do that. You add a super class here. You would then be bumping that top number up to all the schools. The top 100 schools, roughly, again, would be in 7A. 2925 would be the number there. And if you want to compare that to what we're currently at, that would be about 700 students more than the low end of 6A. Right? 6A would then become bumped up to between 2,900 and 2,100, et cetera, with about 200 schools, 2,132 to 1,200. The 5A swath would still be relatively wide, 4A, 3A, 2A, et cetera. You would see how that thing would kind of trickle down. The super class there, if you add in a division at the very top, would have the top 100 schools of 2,925. And I guess my question is, what problem is solved by this, right? There's still a very wide swath between a 2,900 2,900 student school and a 2,100 student school. Still a very wide swath of 6A. And I'm just curious, like, what problem we feel like is being solved here. And so I want to look at the other, before we move on. Here would be a hypothetical if they treated 7A as a full new division, okay, or new classification. Okay, a new classification would be roughly 2564 would move up to 7A, and then you have a smaller range in 6A, a smaller range in 5A, et cetera, all the way down with about 185-ish schools in each of those classifications. But again, you would be running into a lot of the same issues. If you treated 7A the same way you treat 6A, well, then you would still have a school at the very top like Allen playing a team with an enrollment of about 3,000. Or, even in these big schools, you're mitigating the as wide as it can be, but it's still a huge swath there. And so again, my question would be, what is solved by doing this? I'm not sure I think that you can make an argument. I don't think it's a great one. I think you can make an argument that there's a little bit more competitive balance, but I don't think that there's some seismic shift that suddenly Class 7A, you're going to separate all these Goliaths and there's not going to be any left. I think that all you're doing is kind of moving the problems around. And specifically, when I say that, like, everyone always talks about adding 7A as this like catch-all solution. There are problems that come along anytime you're going to mess with the way that things align. And specifically, if we are serious about competitive balance and we're serious about doing these types of things to make it so that the most number of teams have an opportunity to compete at the highest level, well, take a look at this. This is all the UIL 11-man schools, charted by their enrollment, okay? Over there, you've got obviously a huge swath of teams that are basically between about 100 call it 100 students and like 300 students, 400 students, right? But nobody's clamoring for a 3A Division III. Nobody's clamoring for adding another division there to kind of get rid of the glut of teams there and to spread the wealth there, because that's not a sexy problem to solve, right? You also have this kind of spike here between about 2,000 students and 2,800 students, right? That is the big spike. And essentially what we're doing right now with 6A and 5A is we're splitting that. And we're saying, okay, half of you guys, the larger half of you guys are going to the 6A, and the smaller half of you guys are going to 5A. Isn't that what we're trying to do by adding a 7A? Isn't that what we're trying to do, is to make this as equitable as possible? And we focus so much on these outliers, right? We focus so much on these teams, these schools that have the Planos and the Allens of the world, right? That have 5,000 plus students in their school. But take a look at how few schools there are above about, let's just say, 3,200. There's just not that many. And that's, I think, one of the big issues, is that like we want a 7A kind of for the sake of having a 7A, but I haven't heard one person really explain to me why and how that would be more valuable. But then we get to the real kind of crux of the issue. And the reason why this would be a real problem, and you're trading one set of problems for another, okay? These are the 100 largest UIL football schools divided up by their region, where they are in the state. Houston has more than half of them. 51 of the 100 largest schools are in Houston. Another quarter of them are in DFW. I don't think that's any surprise, no. Right? You've got nearly 80% of the top schools in this, or the biggest school in the state in DFW and Houston. Not a surprise; those are the largest areas of the state. The problem is the remaining 25%, roughly. The remaining 25%. 5 in Laredo, only 4 in Austin, 4 in the Permian Basin, 4 in San Antonio, 3 in El Paso, 2 in South Plains, and 1 in the Concho Valley at San Angelo Central. These teams are spread out really, really, really far. There are 3 El Paso teams that would need to be put in some sort of district with somebody, right? In a hypothetical 7A. There are only, and I think we think of I think people think, 7A, it'll be a big city classification, big city classification. Not only is that not true, yes, Houston and DFW, but Austin doesn't have a ton of these mega schools.
No.
San Antonio does not have a ton of these mega schools.
And if you want to say, okay, the drive from Houston to Dallas is 4 hours, you meet halfway, whatever. Where in the world, think about the different, you see El Paso and you see South Plains, and you're like, oh yeah, western part of Texas, not that far apart. Brother, you could not be more wrong.
Y'all real wrong.
The distance between El Paso and the Concho Valley, the distance between El Paso and the Permian Basin, the distance between the Concho Valley and the South Plains, even. I mean, that's almost as much as it is between Houston and Dallas. It's not.
And
then where in the world does Laredo go?
Right. Laredo.
To San Antonio?
Exactly. With San Antonio, and then you're talking about they got to go to Houston, right?
Yeah.
That is the biggest issue here. The biggest issue, and the reason why I think people need to stop using 7A as this catch-all kind of solution to everything, is that I just don't think right now the state has a viable need for it. Because when you take a look at the schools in the state, the issue is that this is an uneven distribution of schools across a wide swath of Texas. And until we get to a point where these teams, where we have so many schools that we need one, what'll end up happening, right? The UIL continues to grow. They're continuing to add schools. The state of Texas continues to add schools across every year. There will get to a point where the classes become so unwieldy that yes, a 7A will have to come along. eventually, just to ease the just because they're going to be like, oh, we can't put 278 schools in 6A, right? That will happen eventually. But this idea that it's going to be some sort of problem solver right now in the year 2024, it's solving a problem that in my opinion, is not so pressing that we need to trade it for other problems.
Well, and the other side of this that is just on the cherry on top is I feel like a lot of people say we need 7A to help with the competition level in the 6A and not make it so top heavy. Let me be the first to tell you that just because a school has the enrollment numbers does not mean that that school is necessarily incredibly competitive.
Yes.
Is your swath of student athletes larger? Yes, but a lot of these are schools that are in very dense population areas that have to go through a lot of other stuff. A lot of those DFW schools, a lot of those Houston schools, Laredo, El Paso, any of those are inner city teams, which have their own issues that go along with that as well, from funding and transportation and all of that stuff. Just because you split off into 7A thinking that there needs to be a better division of competition does not mean that the same teams would not keep winning these.
And that's one of the things that I think is like I think that we get so enamored with some of these mega schools, specifically Allen. I think a lot of this comes back to Allen. Allen has not won a state championship in a hot minute. That's one thing. But then look over the rest of the top 5 schools in the state, right? The 5 other schools. Plano East, presently not, I think they're on the way up, but not presently contending. Plano West, not presently contending. Conroe, and Odessa Permian. Those are the 5 largest schools in the state, right? To me, that size does not necessarily automatically translate to excellence on the football field, and that I think is the issue. I think that, and admittedly, part of this is that Duncanville and North Shore are the 6th and 7th largest schools in the state, and they have been very, very good. I would tell you that their size is a part of why they are good. But I would also tell you that the coaching and the players and the community is another big part of why they're good. That's me. To me, what you're doing with 7A is you're trading one set of issues for another, and then all of a sudden, all these people who are complaining about inequity and inequality as far as the size is concerned are going to be saying, well, yeah, but now I got to drive 4 hours for a district game. It's like, well.
Yeah, and that's the funny part is if you want to talk about size playing an advantage, it's not the 6A schools that are experiencing that. It's the 2A and 3A schools that are experiencing that, because the difference between 2,500 kids and 7,000 kids kind of negates itself, to be honest.
There's a point of diminishing returns there,
but if you want to look at a 3A program, that one school has 503 kids and the other one has 999, let me tell you from a person that went through that, that's where the disparity is. And so adding an additional classification that's higher doesn't even out the competition.
It doesn't relieve that.
It would be better to do a 3A Division 3, you know, and it's like, but you're not going to do that. That's where the competition disparity is.
And that's the thing.
Is the lower level teams.
I think you're spot on. And I think that one of the things is that, like, again, 7A, a lot of it comes back to the 7A sounds fun. 7A sounds good. Man, couldn't you believe being a 7A champion? And because California's got 1 million and Florida's got 1 million and stuff, it just, to me, when you think about it and when you take a look at the current state of affairs, it just doesn't make a ton of sense, in my opinion. Reasonable people can disagree, but for now, I think 7A is not necessarily on the horizon, because when you take a look at the real guts of it, it doesn't necessarily solve the problems that people want it to solve, and
it actually just adds a couple.
It adds a couple, exactly right. It's well put.